Okay. Uh, you guys are actually watching this for the first time. We are definitely live now. It is noon. Well, in a minute. I am here with Tim Platt, who is the one who started up Measure I, and we are basically having a general conversation with him. And just to let everybody know, and I'll be able to actually repeat this during the live feed, that we are, if you comment on here, we're not taking the comments. Uh, we already have the questions that are down. If you guys write a question down, it's not going to be answered. Um, this is going to be something where it gives Tim a platform to actually be able to explain out everything. So that way you guys can be able to know what's going on and be able to go from there. Well, thank you for actually joining me on this, Tim.
Well, I want to thank you for putting this together. I know it's a new technology and we're finding out some of the ins and outs of it as we go forward, even right now, but I appreciate any opportunity to try to give more information to the voters. And I do want to say one thing. I was one of several who put this together and moved it forward. This has been a very satisfying and very great citizen effort. And I need to acknowledge that to the broad range of people who supported putting this together and did the work to get us to this point.
Yeah.
So having said that, Felix, I wanted to take a few moments to talk with you a little bit about the general plan and the city council and zoning regulations and whatnot, because I think if I give you a little bit of explanation, it may make the discussion of the questions somewhat easier.
Okay.
So let me go forward a little bit. I'm going
Sure.
to show you, talk a little bit about the general plan and the general plan land use map and land use designations. I'm going to talk a little bit about Measure I and the fact that it gives us the ability to approve land use designation changes. I'm going to talk a little bit about City Council and their position, their place in this, their approval of the general plan and zoning and their approval of amendments to both. We'll talk a little bit about zoning regulations and where they fit in the piece. And we will talk a little bit about Measure I not having any effect on zoning regulations. It's just not part of what Measure I is about at all. Okay. So let me go in a little bit more detail, if I may.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit now. Let's talk about the Martinez general plan. The general plan and the general plan land use are the supreme document in Martinez that talk about and regulate land use throughout the city. They are like the Constitution in that they are the law that regulates all the law below it. The law below it like zoning regulations.
Right.
So the general plan uses the term land use designation, and that's what we'll be talking about today is land use designation. It's not zoning.
Okay.
And the land use designation is what the general plan uses to talk about the different uses for land. So, for instance, if you look at the general plan map,
okay,
here, and I know it's hard to see,
yeah,
you'll see a couple of things. Number one, you'll see all these land use designations here. You won't be able to read them on the feed, I don't think, but they're like commercial, light industrial, residential 6 to 12 units, office, neighborhood park, all different land use designations.
Right.
And over here, we've exploded and made larger the particular land use designations that relate to open space and parks. And these,
I see they're all green.
Yes, yes, and they are all covered by the Measure I. And on the map, it's all green. All the green on the map is covered by Measure I and the protections in allowing public approval of any changes to those lands. So that gives a little bit of an idea there. Now I want to talk a little bit about City Council approval and amendments. The City Council approves the general plan land use map and any changes in designations, and then it does amendments on them also. So that's the City Council's power. We haven't cataloged all the most recent general plan amendments, but I do know that the general plan land use map was approved by the City Council, reapproved in 2010. Amendments were approved in 2012 and 2013, so it's very current.
Right.
And that map is the only map in Martinez that exists anywhere that gives us the ability, that gives us a full list of all the open space and parks in Martinez.
Okay.
Now that map and the general plan are what we use as the basis for Measure I.
Right.
And that's all we did. We used what's in the general plan and what's in the existing general plan land use map, including all the existing boundaries and all the existing designations of land use. That's what was the basis for Measure I. Measure I did not change the map in any way. Measure I did not change the general plan in any way. Measure I only said that when you take a open space or park land use designation and the city council decides to amend it to turn it into a land use designation for residential or industrial or commercial,
right,
then Measure I will require that voters approve that change. And that's what Measure I is about.
Okay.
So it's as simple as that. When the city council decides to convert open space or parks to more intensive development, any open space or parks in Martinez, then the voters have the ability under Measure I to approve that city council change. And that's the protection we're giving to our open space and parks. And that's why we can say that Measure I doesn't change any of the uses you can do on your land, because it doesn't talk about changing the map or changing the plan itself. It talks about only saying when the city council votes to change land use designations for open space and parks, we get to approve that.
Okay.
Is that so? I hope that is a little bit of clarity.
Yeah, actually it does, because basically it's like if we already happen to have our own property and everything, like say, for example, if we own a house and it's on our property already, this basically, that it's like, okay, no, we're not touching your stuff. We're just touching the stuff that's already in it, that's already open and basically designated as parkland to begin with.
And we'll get into that a little bit deeper as we go forward. I will mention that the reason why Measure I is in place and why we are fighting to get it made into law so that voters have approval of land use designation changes for open space and parks is because the city council has approved at least 3 times in recent history amendments to the general plan that convert open space to housing. And we think the public needs to have a voice in those kinds of decisions. And we see growing pressure for more conversions like that in the future as population increases. These lands are iconic. Once they are converted, that open space is gone forever. And we feel that the public has to have a voice in those decisions, not just 5 people on the city council.
Right.
So that's a little bit of the background of why we've done Measure I. So let's talk a little bit about zoning. Zoning regulations have to comply with the general plan, but you'll notice that zoning regulations are also controlled by the city council. So the city council controls the general plan, land use map, and the land use designations, and the city council also controls all the zoning. And the zoning just is designed to give more detail to the land use designations. So for instance, if there's a land use designation for residential 6 to 12 units, something like that, at the zoning level, there may be more restrictions or definition put on that, like you can only go 2 stories high, or you have to have a 10-foot setback from the road, or things of that nature. That's
Right.
what zoning's about. Measure I has nothing at all to do with zoning. Measure I has never even mentioned zoning. It's not part of the picture at all. So we hope that gives a little bit of background to what hopefully will be some good questions, but at least we'll be talking with some terms we understand.
Yes.
And I'm going to put this down now. It's a little bit different than what we thought. We apologize for sort of jumping around but taking a wide view is not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Facebook doesn't allow us to zoom in on things anymore. I wish they did, but coding took that out. So hey, and I've actually been fighting to get that put in the first place, and it's actually upsetting the fact that I can't do that.
it would make the experience a little bit easier, especially in a case like this. But we're glad to be doing this. I feel a little bit like a pioneer in the technology.
Yeah. Apparently people are actually commenting. I'm actually trying to load up. If you guys have questions, realize I'm not going to answer any questions unless they were already submitted to a prior thread. I'm actually trying to load up comments right now, and it looks like they don't want to load up. Thank you guys actually for definitely tuning in. It looks like we have at least 8 viewers so far, which actually helps things out. Like I said, I'm trying to actually get this going here for the comments, and unlike on my phone where the thing actually does show the full comments and everything. Oh, here we go. Finally, took it a little bit just to jump it up. Actually, there was one comment that I do actually want to put out there. One actually said, "Very good clarification. Thank you. Makes a difference."
Good.
Yeah, the other one I'm not actually going to get into on that one, but I do want to actually get off on one thing right off the bat, because a lot of people have been jumping in on this, basically saying that it's just dealing with this one particular thing, not anything else on there. And they've been really harping on the whole thing. If I had a harp, I'd be strumming it along right now, and that is basically the one key to the whole thing. I don't know how to put it delicately or anything else like that, and being subtle is not my thing. It's basically dealing with Pine Meadow. How this came out of that whole thing, yes, I know that, but is this in any way dealing with that at the current time? Basically, where it's like if you guys are trying to stop the development that obviously is going to be going through. But if you guys, how this whole thing deals with that, because right now I want to get that out of the way so that way people know what's going on when it comes to that, and then we can move on from that.
So the group that put together this initiative had a broader goal in mind than just Pine Meadow. I will say this, that Pine Meadow is, and if I can move the camera, or if you can move the camera, you can probably show it. Yeah. This is the official city map, and the official city map shows Pine Meadow as open space and recreation. And this is the map that we use as the basis for the initiative. So whether we wanted to or not, Pine Meadow is part of this initiative.
Okay.
And there's no way we were going to change the map in any way. So that made Pine Meadow automatically a part of the initiative. Now, having said that, Pine Meadow is an issue. It is one of the 3 instances of where the city council has voted to convert open space to housing.
Right.
But the issue with the initiative is much broader than that. The city has, first of all, converted other open spaces to housing, voted to convert them to housing. But we're looking to the future here. There is not going to be any decrease in the demand to turn open space and parks into other uses. It's only going to increase in the future. And the neighborhoods feel the impacts of that, and the quality of life changes for us. And these lands are unique. They bring us health, they bring us connection with nature, they bring us value to our property. And when we lose them to conversion, they're lost forever.
Okay.
And that's what Measure I is about. It's about the future and trying to preserve and protect where we can those assets that are so important to us all alive today and to our children and to our grandchildren. So Pine Meadow is a part of it, but it's a little itty bitty piece of it. And we hope people are aware of that. That Measure I is about the future and is about giving the people a say in converting these precious lands.
Okay, so basically, when it comes, just trying to finish up and wrap up on that, because it is going to be harped on for a while. We already know that. So essentially, when the city, at the last time that they dealt with it, when the city council actually dealt with Pine Meadow, that right there, when they changed that, they hadn't actually affected the map yet, even though they had changed it so that way it could actually be converted into the housing itself. So that way it actually allowed the developers to do that. They said, oh yeah, we're, except for Laura who voted against it. The rest of the council said yes, and it's already been changed, but on the map, it has yet to actually be changed on the map yet.
Well, let me clarify that. Accidentally, we looked at the map at City Hall, and it's finally up on the wall at City Hall. And it magically had changed Pine Meadow on April of this year, just before the Planning Commission hearing on Pine Meadow, changed it to residential. So if you look on the map today, it will show residential. That happened about 3 or 4 weeks ago. But for the purposes of the initiative and for the purposes of the lawsuit that the city brought against us, proponents of Measure I, it shows on that map, it shows Pine Meadow as open space recreation. And the actual decision or final determination of whether Pine Meadow is really open space or residential will be the result of the lawsuit that is in place now that is just beginning. So we won't know the real answer of what's going to happen to Pine Meadow for years, very probably with the way the courts work. I hope that helps a little bit. But again, I reiterate, Measure I is about the future. It's about our future, and it's about the future for our children and their children. Do we want to have open space and parks? Do we want to make sure that they are protected as much as we can? Then vote yes for Measure I.
Well, at least now that we've got that whole thing clarified, and the fact that the current map is actually doesn't even show that on there. Yes, we are actually going to be moving on to the future, so that way it's like, look, now that we know that it's all been that it's all now current up to date, the measure is dealing with this map, not the one that's currently sitting on the wall over at City Hall. It's just dealing with this map here. So as far as we can, in our minds, we can basically just go, okay, we're just putting an X on this and not even dealing with that. So it's like, okay. Now, a question that we actually had on the prior thread prior to this live feed from a Melissa Mahoy. I hope I pronounced that last name right. She wanted to know from you, if there's minimal places left in Martinez to build minus open space, how should Martinez generate more tax money? And she wanted to thank you for your dedication on this.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it. And I know what you've done for the community, too, and I respect that very much. Let's talk a little bit about housing and how it financially helps the city, because very frankly, housing is not the answer to our fiscal problems in this city. So Brad Kilger is the city manager, and you can confirm this with him. A $50 million housing project, where $50 million goes to the developer for the project, generates in property tax yearly for the city only $75,000. People think that housing generates huge amounts of money. It does not. $75,000 won't pay for the road repairs down the line, won't pay for probably half of a police officer. So thinking that more housing is going to solve our budget problems is not really the answer. Now, there are some other taxes that come in, some tax flows that come in with new housing, some sales tax inflows, some, I think they're called in lieu of taxes, and maybe that takes that 75,000 up to over 100,000. But we're not talking about housing being the lucrative tax answer for our city. There is another chunk of money that comes in with housing, and the first time the housing comes in, it is charged impact fees for the impacts on the community, and they can be substantial. So they can be $10,000, $14,000, something of that nature. And therefore, the impacts of the project on roads, on the infrastructure of the city, on parks, on other amenities like that. And people may think that that's a big boon in money, but by law, those impact fees are only to cover the actual cost to the city of having that new project in place. So you don't make money on them, you just stay even. So the idea that you're going to find an answer to our tax problems by building, 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 building needs to be looked at really carefully by people. And it is not a justification to just build housing everywhere, and it certainly isn't a justification to say precious open space needs to be converted to that.
Oh, that definitely helped out. I mean, for me personally, it's like, okay, you get, because I even pointed this out at several of the city council meetings. It's like, look, you guys are trying to do all this stuff here, and yet the taxes that are generated from this are like a drop in the bucket compared to everywhere else that you can actually be able to generate it from. But unfortunately, I'm like basically like talking to a brick wall. It'll listen, won't give you any feedback, but it'll listen. Okay, let's see. Actually, here's a huge one. I'll get this one out of the way.
Okay.
Gary Miles asks you, let's say I am a homeowner that has a house right next to Hidden Lakes Park in 1972. When they drew the general plan map, they made the circle around Hidden Lakes Park big and actually circled my house. No one noticed the error until this year when I applied for a permit to put a skylight in. When I went for the permit, the city told me I couldn't be given one because the general plan map shows my property is open space. This scenario will impact my properties around the city and is a major concern. My question is, as the homeowner, if Measure I passes, what are my options for correcting this error in zoning? And here's a little he actually never finished the comment after that. But yeah, how does that whole thing deal with on that?
Well, let's look at this again, if we can. And let's look at the general plan and the general plan land use map and general plan designations. And let's look at this piece. These are approved and amended by the city council.
Okay.
So that map, that if it does have an error in it, it was reapproved by the city council in 2010. And we can't really comment on whether the city made an error there or not. We based our initiative, and this is the point about Measure I. Measure I doesn't affect half of the situations, any of the situations really, that people are talking about with regard to zoning perhaps being different from what the general plan land use designation is, because Measure I didn't change any land use designation, did not change the land use map, and did not change the general plan itself. It did just one thing. It said when the city council wants to change land use designation for open space and park to a land use designation for residential or something of that nature, they have to get approval of Martinez voters. Now, having said that, Gary his issue has been brought up in different ways by a number of people. And we have to say this: we are not the experts on zoning or on land use designations per se. We can't answer those questions ourselves. We counsel people like Gary to go to the city, to pose their question to the city. We recommend it be done in writing, and to get a written answer from the city as to what the city is saying the law says and what the city is saying the city is allowed to do. We would be more than glad to give feedback when we see that and give benefit of what knowledge we have. There's one key thing to point out. The city council has done a report on 550 properties in Martinez. And it is part of their plan, I think, that we believe, to try to confuse the public and to try to give out imprecise information to the public. But those 550 landowners, in that report, the city is implying that they will lose, the city council is implying they will lose the ability to do development on their house, to do changes. There have been statements that some of those lands will be forced to become permanent open space. And our basic concern is that people are being frightened by some of what the city council is implying. And we think that is wrong. So we have tried to state to the public as a public service that there are reasons for these 550 property owners to not be concerned. And we're surprised the city council isn't pointing this out to them. And to go to Gary's point, one of the things that we have tried to point out, and it comes from our land use lawyers giving us some advice, is that at the boundaries of land use designation borders on the general plan map, the city council has some discretion as to how they zone. And so we're more than willing to give more information on that if it would be helpful. But we're trying to tell people that some of these things that are we believe fear tactics from the city council, you need to look at a little bit more carefully. Now, we said a couple of other things about that too, and this is very important to point out. So people have been told that their single family houses may be in jeopardy, and the ability to modify them in the future may be in jeopardy.
Right.
We have published to people, again, based upon information from our legal counsel, that state law says that even if the city council has made errors in zoning on single family houses that they may have zoned incorrectly, those houses are not in jeopardy at all after they are built, and the zoning, even if it is wrong, will stay in place forever, so that anything allowed by that zoning for a single family housing will still be allowed. So if people are getting scared by the city council report that they're going to have problems with changing their house, we want to give them that piece of information. And we want them to know that they can push the city in that direction. Now, the other thing we try to point out to keep people from being fearful of this city council report is that several of the land use categories, open space land use categories that the city has named in their report, are actually allowed limited amounts of housing in the general plan. So that some of the lands that the city has been targeting to try to add to the confusion actually have rights to housing. And we pointed that out to them. It's much of the housing in the Franklin Hills area and much of the housing in the Devan Estates area and along Alhambra Hills. So that's a third thing that we wanted to make sure the public knows. And the fourth thing is that there are properties that are called slope density, fall under the slope density designation. And they also, under certain circumstances, are allowed housing in the general plan. So we're trying to take some of the fear that's been induced by this city report out of the landowners, and we're confused why the city isn't doing the same thing. We will say that if the city has made errors in zoning, that they have existed for years, and it's curious why they're just being brought up now. And they would have to be dealt with by the city one way or another, whether there's a Measure I or there isn't. But as far as we're concerned, the most important thing is to take those 550 people that are being scared by this city council report, and it's a very confusing report. We're not even sure we understand what the city's saying, and tell them that they don't have as much reason to be scared. And we do counsel them, go to the city in writing and say, you have published something that is scaring me, tell me exactly what it means in writing. And that's the way we're going to get to the bottom of some of this.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because in all honesty, I mean, they put even if they try to make it work for the public, they put a lot of legalese in there, and it's like, okay, unless you happen to have a translator, you have a hard time even trying to understand half the stuff that they're saying in there.
It's true, and I will say that the city report is based in part on the developer lawyer letters, so there's been some input there. I will say that some of the issues in the city report have already gone before a Superior Court judge in Contra Costa County, and the judge found all of those contentions baseless and threw them out of court. So, and we believe that that the other allegations the city is making in those reports are equally as baseless and will be found to be illegitimate and just misinformation.
Okay, well, just to let everybody know, because I'm seeing a lot of comments on here, and honestly, since this is the first time I've actually done it through my own computer, I'm trying to load up the comments here. Just to let everybody know, if you guys put questions on here, I'm not answering any of the questions. I am reading the comments, though. So I'm not asking because the questions were already inputted on a prior thread, at least from what I could gather from those. But I'm not answering questions on here at all. Um, but this is something that has been confusing the hell out of everybody for a while. I'm actually thankful for you, Tim, for actually clarifying quite a bit of this up. Because in all honesty, it's like, okay, it's somebody you get told about something and suddenly you have question marks, like 3 question marks bobbing up over your head, like what the? But it's like, okay, seriously, how it's oh god. But this here is actually is doing the job of actually explaining everything out, which is good because it turns the mud that we've been getting told basically into something that we can actually be able to see. It's turning it from the mud that it is to the clear water that it should be, so we can actually be able to see through everything that we need to actually be able to see through.
Well, that's a good outcome if that's what happens, if people are getting a clearer idea of what's going on and what the issues are. I'm very happy to have had this session.
In all honesty, I mean, this actually reminds me of something that happened up in, I read about it in the paper years ago, up in, I think it was Oregon. A judge, it was either Oregon or it was Washington. I forgot. It's one of the 2 northern states above ours. A judge actually ruled, actually, no, it was Portland, Oregon. A judge ruled that anything that's written out now from the city, from lawyers, from literally anybody in government, you can't write it in legalese anymore. You have to write it for the general layman. And this here actually, it essentially helps do that. It's basically turning it from an understanding of legalese to a general layman's terms, where we can. It's like, okay, this is what it says. This is what it actually means here, and that actually helps out very gratefully.
Well, you bring up a good point. The city council has been opposed to Measure I from the very inception. They have delayed putting us on the ballot. They sued proponents of the Measure I to try to keep us off the ballot. They put together this, at taxpayer expense, this very expensive and very misleading report that does nothing but bash Measure I. They voted to spend $100,000 of taxpayer money on high-priced San Francisco lawyers, top rate $770 an hour, to try to undermine Measure I. They even went to the point of breaking the law, and we had to take the city council to court to force them to obey the law and put Measure I on the ballot. And then what did they do? In one day, without any public hearing, they threw up Measure F. And that was designed to just confuse and mislead the public. This whole process has been directed in that direction, in our opinion. And the final insult is going to be when you read your voter booklet, there is an impartial analysis on Measure I and on Measure F. And the city wrote both of them.
Oh, geez.
They wrote the impartial analysis on Measure I that they have taken to court, that they have spent money to undermine. It's incredible. And even on the ballot, there is a little ballot description right next to Measure I, where you vote on it, yes or no, and right next to Measure F, they wrote both of them also. So on their ballot description, it says requires voter approval for changes. And on our ballot description, they don't put that in.
Ooh.
So the deck has been stacked. The public knows what's going on. We truly believe this is the Citizens Initiative. Over 4,000 Martinez voters signed the petition to put this on the ballot. And we hope the public is very aware of what's going on and will support us in Election Day, June 5th.
Yeah, because I noticed the one thing right when election season started, and we're seeing all the signs that go out there for vote for this person for such and such a position, or vote for this person for like governor. you guys had your signs out there right off the bat. And it's like, okay, I'm seeing like vote yes on I. And I mean, we even have one at our street corner right here that's asking people to vote yes on I, no on F. And about half a month later, I'm seeing no on I signs, and it's like, wait a minute here, these things look like the other ones.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what the is up with this? It's like, okay, are they deliberately trying to say, oh no, these guys, we're the same people. We want you to now vote against our measure. It's like, okay, no. I see the subtle differences that are in the sign where it says vote yes on F, no on I, and it's like, boy, you guys are really actually trying to mislead everybody by doing that on there. And this is actually literally the first time in election history where you have two measures that are basically fighting each other on the whole thing, and they have literally, to combat the whole thing, they put two signs out there that are almost identical, and it's like, okay, this does not make sense at all. It's like, okay, this is just blowing my mind here.
Well, we do say that that copying us is the sincerest form of flattery.
I don't think so in this case.
That a lot of what's going on is trying to make this a confusing issue, and a lot of the comments we see in the press, a lot of the accusation about signs, a lot of the talk from even parking, park and rec commissioners, is really designed just to try to make this confusing. And it really is much more simple than that. Measure I does one thing. It says when the city council votes to convert any open space or any park in Martinez to more intensive development, like a big developer housing project or commercial project, then that city council vote must be approved by Martinez voters. And that's it. The simple, the long, and the short of it. And I will say one further thing about Measure F. Measure F, we call the City Council Measure F, and we say F is for fraud. And we do that for one reason, because the City Council measure doesn't tell you this, but the City Council measure leaves out the very open space that the developers want to buy and get the City Council to convert to housing or to the developer project. And then the City Council does that conversion, and they do it without voter approval. And that's why we feel that Measure F should be voted no on, and why Measure I, the citizen initiative, should receive your yes vote on June 5th. And that's the end of my commercial, okay?
We've got one last question, but we're gonna reiterate at the beginning of this one as well as at the end of it, the whole thing when it comes to Measure I, so that way people can get it into their minds for how the whole thing actually is supposed to work compared to what people are actually saying it works. Because, I mean, the city council even put out a flyer, or a mailer, I should say, that basically says, it shows what theirs does, all of the yes, check marks compared to yours, which has like, yes, no. And it's like, okay, seriously, we need to actually reiterate what this actually does compared to what it's being said it does. About a minute somewhat into the whole thing. So reiterate on Measure I how that whole thing is actually supposed to work compared to what you're actually being told, or what we're actually being told.
Okay, so very simply, we have the Martinez General Plan and the Martinez General Plan land use map, and they talk about land use designations on them. And the City Council gets to approve the Martinez General Plan, the land use map, and gets to amend them. That's their bailiwick. This is the base document and the most important document talking about land use in Martinez. And Measure I does one thing. It does not change the land use map. It does not change any of the terms in the Martinez General Plan. It does one thing only. It puts the requirement in the general plan that whenever our city council decides to change the land use designation of any open space or park in Martinez to a land use designation that is like residential or commercial or industrial, more intensive development, whenever the city council votes to do that, Measure I says that will require approval of Martinez voters. So it gives Martinez voters a say in converting these very critical and very limited lands to more intensive uses. And that's what Measure I does, short and simple. It in no way says anything about changing what a person can do with their personal property in Martinez. If a person has open space, for instance, and they can do grazing and agriculture and recreation and maybe even do some limited housing on it now under the general plan, that remains exactly the same because Measure I doesn't change the conditions of the general plan. It just gives the voters approval capability when the city council wants to convert that open space and parks to more intensive development. And I'm going to shoot way down here to regulations, zoning and regulations. Measure I has nothing at all to do with zoning and regulations. It's not even mentioned in Measure I. Again, the city council takes care of zoning and regulations, approves and amends them, and approves and amends the general plan and the land use map.
Okay, that actually does help things out.
Great. Glad that clarification helps. And I think you've got a good question.
Yeah, from Greg Travers. Now this was sort of an off-the-ball odd one because I didn't actually know that this was behind there at all. He said, "Do you really consider the old trailer park behind Nob Hill valuable open space that needs protection? If so, why?" That right there, I didn't even know there was a trailer park behind Nob Hill. To be totally honest, it's like, wait, what?
Well, the question is about what we call the Sino construction development. It's just below Nob Hill, and it looks right down on Grace Episcopal Church. And that development, Sino came into town and asked to take this plot that was zoned for 5 to 9 housing units. I think I've got that right. It might be 5 to 7. And Sino asked to be allowed to build 74 units on that piece of property. And in order to accommodate those 74 units, Sino asked to convert 2 acres of open space on that property so that he could fit the 74 units in. The project received a lot of public input. It is right above Grace Episcopal Church. The project looks right down on a valley that had been promised medium and low density housing above it. It's surrounded by lots of that size and that nature. And Measure I would say that project would go to a vote of the public after the city council did the general plan amendment to convert the open space. I personally believe that project should have gone to a public vote. I would be very glad to have it be included under Measure I. There are other projects like the Freitas open space, like Pine Meadow, and projects in the future that may be of different nature, but this question brings up the key point of this whole election. Do people feel that open space and parks in Martinez are jeopardized enough and important enough that the public should have a strong voice in converting them to other uses? And obviously, I think a lot of people in Martinez think the answer to that is yes. And that's why they're going to vote yes on I.
Yeah. Because in all honesty, I mean, with the encroachment that we happen to have these days when it comes to trying to develop more homes for people, the one thing which I've noticed is the fact that they're looking at a whole, basically any bit of land that they can actually be able to get a hold of, just to be able to actually put homes on for people to actually live in. Now, the problem is the fact that even if you build homes, you're pricing it so high, nobody can actually live there in the first place. And thanks to this, it'll actually say, look, yes, we do have limited lands here, but unless it's already for that to begin with, we got to ask the people about this, because otherwise it's like for example, like a little bit of space that John Muir sat in, which is now there for the city as a little bit of a simple park. It's suddenly going to be like, yeah, no, we're going to change that. We're going to put some houses on there. I mean, because when this whole thing came out, I was even pointing out that, say, for example, Susanna Park, people wanted to, it's like, okay, what's this going to do when it comes to the whole thing? And I told them, it's like, look, you have a developer that comes in, they see Susanna Park as prime spot to put apartments or condos or whatever the hell they want to put in there, probably a little sized strip mall. They plunk down cash to the city council, and next thing you know, city council's approving it, and bye-bye Susanna Park. And this here hopefully will, I believe, protect that from actually taking place.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on the key point. Measure I doesn't stop conversion of open space or parks to other uses. That can still happen, and there may be circumstances under which that would be a good thing. But Measure I does give people, the residents, the voters of Martinez, an opportunity to have a voice in those very critical situations. It takes the power out of the hands of just 5 people on the city council, and it gives the power to the residents, to the voters of Martinez, to the people who are going to see the impacts of those kinds of changes and conversions. And we think that's a very important thing to do for now and definitely for our future. So we really recommend people vote yes for Measure I, the citizen initiative, and look forward to seeing results June 5th. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to definitely be a fight for either measure on June 5th. I know there's quite a few people that are on R&R or rants and raves that essentially want to vote no on both. But the kicker is the fact that whichever receives the most yes votes will actually be kicked in, will actually win. Doesn't matter whether it's F or I or F, whichever one you want to go with. Whichever receives the most yes votes is the one that's actually going to win. So even if everybody votes no on both, and then you have one person that votes yes on I will win.
Well, let's clarify that. Both measures need to have a majority of yes votes. They have to have more yes votes than no votes against them. And then if both measures end up having more yes votes than no votes against them, then the measure that has the most yes votes will win.
Okay.
And we are recommending to people that they do not vote, that they vote no on the City Council Measure F. F is for fraud, as we said. It leaves out that very critical open space that the big developers want to buy and get the City Council to convert to housing or commercial projects, and get the rest of us to just handle the impacts. And we are asking people to vote yes for Measure I, the citizen initiative, and give us all this added protection for us and for our children. And I want to thank you, Felix. This is time consuming, it's difficult, and you put a lot of effort into this. And I really am appreciative, and I think I speak for many people in the community also, of the effort you are doing to try to bring information to the public on this and other issues. So thank you very much, and thank you for letting me have an opportunity to talk to the voters.
Hey, not a problem on that. Also want to make sure everybody knows, for those that actually watch afterwards, that the best way, aside from you, and aside from the pamphlets that you hand out and everything, to make sure that you guys actually go read the book that you got from your from the records office for voting, as well as, if need be, go on to Ballotpedia. They actually have a full reading of the whole thing on there, because they basically just transcribe it from the book to the website. So that way it's easier, it's digital, people can actually see it, and you can go to your websites if need be. but definitely do the research. I can't emphasize that enough. Do the research.
That's right. And do remember that the impartial analysis for our Measure I has been written by the city.
Yeah.
So take it with a grain of salt when you read it. We also have a website, as you know, www.martinezopenspace.org, and we have an email address if you wish to contact us, martinezopenspace@outlook.com. And we have a Facebook page, Martinez Open Space. So feel free to communicate with us. We'd like to know what you're thinking, and we'd like to give you what more information we can that would be helpful to you. Thanks again.
Yes, thank you very much.
Very good, Felix.